Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, as Uganda strives for social and economic transformation, what steps should the country take to overcome the bottlenecks, and what is the role of social protection in realizing this goal? Uganda continues to struggle with efforts to try and transform itself into a developed country, a move that requires tackling poverty and inequalities that currently affect a large section of the population. Debates on the Ugandan economy, especially issues to do with poverty levels and development indices, remains controversial, with some experts challenging government assertions that the economy has grown and that the poverty levels have declined. In some countries, governments have taken steps to ensure that those who are very poor get subsidies through social protection. The Ugandan government, through the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, has put in place a social protection system, beginning with facilitating the elderly and households headed by children. Tomorrow, the expanding social protection program in the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development and the Economic Policy Research Centre of Makerere, the Economic Policy Research Centre, will host a national dialogue on the theme Inclusive Socio-Economic Transformation for Uganda, the Role of Social Protection, to share and discuss certain studies undertaken. Now, a professor of political science and economist is one of the presenters by virtue of being an authority on this matter. So tonight we take a look at the challenges related to inequality, social security and poverty, among other challenges that need to be urgently addressed to ensure socio-economic transformation. Our guests tonight, Professor John Roemer, Professor of Political Science and Economics at the Yale University in the USA. You're most welcome, Professor Roemer.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Mr. Stephan Kasaija, Head of the Social Protection Secretariat at the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. Professor, could you begin by explaining to us the concept of social protection?
Well, I'd actually rather begin by explaining the concept of equality of opportunity, because it's inequality of opportunity, I think, that requires us to have policies of social protection. Many people think that equality of opportunity is a simple concept that simply means that when people are competing for jobs, they should be awarded the job based solely on their merit, rather than upon extraneous characteristics they may have, such as who their friends are, or whom they know, or what their sex is, and things like that. But although that's important for equality of opportunity, it's the idea goes much deeper than that. Because if you have two people who, let's say, have different degrees of merit when they're competing for a position, a career, a job, you have to ask why they have those different levels of merit, why they're differentially equipped to do this job. And a large part of the reason is that earlier in life, as children, they faced very different opportunities. So one might have been born into a well-off family in a city where there were good schools, and the other might have been born in a rural area with poor schools to a family that was not well educated itself and had low income. And those characteristics of the environment of the child have a massive effect on the kinds of skills that the child will eventually develop, and hence how well he'll do in the job market. Equality of opportunity, therefore, requires us to undertake policies which will level the playing field in the sense of compensating people who have bad luck in the birth lottery, so to speak. They're born into unlucky circumstances, so that when it comes to the point of competing for jobs, they will have had a fair shot in the beginning. And so the work that I've been doing in Uganda is to actually try to construct statistics showing the degree of inequality of opportunity that exists in this country, which is strikingly high.
All right, so basically the old adage still applies, that if you want to make it in life, you have to choose your parents very well.
That's right.
Well, let's talk about social protection. Maybe Mr. Kasaija, you can talk to us about that. Explain the concept of social protection, first of all.
Yes, listeners, social protection in the Ugandan context We are talking about public and private interventions which address vulnerabilities which are associated with being or becoming poor. So for the case of Uganda, as Professor Roemer has already talked, we still see a lot of inequality of opportunities, and as a result, some groups have already become vulnerable, but also others are bound to become vulnerable if that cause of inequality of opportunity is not addressed. So here we are talking of groups which are already vulnerable, like senior citizens, older persons above 60 and 65 years and above. We are talking of vulnerable children like orphans. We are talking of persons with disabilities, and all these, you find that they may not be able to compete. So those have already been affected. So they don't have an equal access to income like the rest of us. So yet you have all surviving the same market. So we think that's why social protection comes in, to try and guarantee some of these people a minimum standard in terms of income.
All right.
They can afford to have a good standard of living.
Okay, we'll get back to the philosophy of it later. But first of all, what exactly is it doing in this country?
Yeah, in Uganda, we have already started a pilot intervention in 14 districts. And the idea behind this pilot is to try and generate evidence that social protection, providing intervention through the public, supports these vulnerable groups so that they can have a better standard of living, is a useful thing for us to be doing. First, we know there are many benefits related to that. When you give consumption to these households, they are able to take care of their children. And in the process, you're addressing what he has mentioned. If they lacked and missed some of those opportunities, they can be able to catch up and have a standard of living. For children who live with these vulnerable, like older persons, it means you are ensuring that they can access education. Because we have UPE, which is a government intervention that has done very well to bring children into school. But we know there is a challenge of dropout. And when you look behind what is making these children drop out, some of the causes are small. You find these senior citizens can't afford to buy a uniform for this child to be in school, can't afford a book for this child to be in school, a pen to be in school. There isn't enough food at home for the child to be able to go to school. So we are looking at this income transfer being given to this household to make sure that the household can meet those basic needs, and as a result you see these children staying in school. We have already done this in the 14 districts where we are operating. 4 of them already, people have already started receiving this transfer, and the evidence on the ground really shows that people spend this income on those exact issues I've talked about: children being supported to go to school, children being sent to hospital who could not have gone, senior citizens accessing health services which they could not have done because of this small income. We give 23,000 shillings per month to this senior citizen, but the impact is great. From the voices we have heard from these people, it is having a good impact on them.
All right. I mean, 23,000 won't buy you a meal in a 5-star hotel in Kampala, but in the village it's an enormous amount of money. And you have 14 districts, you show up and give 23,000 shillings every month to old men and women in those places. Yes. Professor, talk to us about the rationale of this. Does it work?
Well, I think Mr. Kasaija is much more qualified to talk about the effects of the policies in Uganda. I don't know that much about the country. But I'd like to give a couple more examples of the degree of inequality of opportunity and how unfair that is in this country from the surveys that we've made. The basic idea then, just to reiterate, is that a fair society or a just society is one in which people's achievements are determined by their own efforts rather than by luck. And the most important kind of luck that people face is the luck of, as I said, the environment in which they grew up, which includes their family background, whether it was rural or urban, whether they were born in the north or in the central region of the country, and so on. So let me just give a couple of examples. One very important aspect of the environment for the child is the education of his parents. We have computed the following, that of those people whose parent, the household head of the family when he was a child, whether it could be a mother or a father, of those people for whom the household head had not completed primary school, 80% of them have monthly incomes now, these are now adults, of less than 50,000 shillings. Whereas of those present-day young people who are workers, whose household head in childhood had at least some primary education, had at least some post-primary education, only 40% currently have incomes less than 50,000. So, in other words, the odds of having an income below 50,000 shillings a month based upon this difference in your parents' education are 2 to 1. 2 to 1. I'll give a second example. We have looked at the region of the country a person is born in as a very important circumstance determining his, a very important aspect of luck concerning his future achievements. The northern region is the poorest region in the country. The central region is the best. And so there are 4 regions. We also have eastern and western. Of those born in the northern region, 90% as adults have incomes of less than 50,000 shillings.
90%?
90%. Of those born in the central region, 45% have monthly incomes less than 50,000. So again, your probability of being below 50,000 a month, the odds are 2 to 1 if you were born in the north versus being born in the center. Those are totally matters of luck, and it's unfair that people should suffer in that way because of bad luck. So the purpose of these social protection programs and government policies in general to alleviate poverty is to give people even chances. And you find that in more highly developed countries, people have much more even chances in general. I mean, I'd say the countries that have most successfully equalized opportunities for their citizens are the northern European countries, and in particular the Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland.
Mr. Kasaija,
so this is an aspect of economic development to do this.
Okay. Mr. Kasaija, how did you choose these 14 districts? Could you give us a rundown of them?
Yes, there are 14 districts. We are talking of districts being representative of all the regions in Uganda.
So first of all, you select them for all the regions. You didn't go to one zone.
We didn't go to one region.
Yes.
Of course, by that time, when the selection was being done, the northern districts were disadvantaged. That's the time when we were having the Coney War going on.
Yes.
So, and yet this, as I told you, it is a pilot. We wanted to generate evidence to show that this can work in Uganda. So the circumstances on the ground that time could not allow us to go into the core, for instance, Acholi region. So yet we thought we could be going on generating evidence, test this policy. When it works, it means government buys in fully and scales up the whole program countrywide, and then we cover everybody. But generally in the north, we have mainly concentrated in the northeast. Karamoja region has 4 of the districts.
Yes.
We're talking of Moroto, Nakapiripiri, Amdat, and Napak. Then we are having Apache and Kole. We are having Kaberamaido, we are having Katakwi. Then we have Nebi and Zombo. Then we come to Chiboga, representing the central region, but it broke up and created Jankwanzi, so we have also kept that since it is a study. Then in the west, we only have Chenjojo district, and Chegego also has broken up from them, so we have kept those. So the whole idea is to see whether this concept can work in all these regions. So I think that's what I would say in terms of the targeting. But the targeting, again, we are picking the poorest districts in each of the region, because that was the other idea that we start. If a district is known to be the bottom in the region, we start with that. So we'll be bringing on board the others which follow from down.
Who pays for it?
Paying for the grants and the money. Yes, this is a program which is a pilot, as I said. We have development partners and government. We have DFID, we have Irish Aid.
That's the British Aid group.
Yeah, Irish Aid.
Yes.
Ireland, and then we have UNICEF supporting, then the government of Uganda.
Is it sustainable?
Yes, we are really, that's why I said it is a study. We are testing all those, but the experience we already have and the evidence we already have, this program can be sustained. To provide a grant for 65 people aged 65 and above countrywide, we would need just 2.8% of our government budget. This compares very well with health, which spends 8%, compares well with the education, which spends 16%.
It's almost level with as defense, the Ministry of Defense.
No, ours is 2.8%.
Well, defense is around 2.8%.
Oh, okay. But that's what it will take to cover all your senators.
So it's something that the government can do it.
Something people. So
the government can do it.
The government can afford it. It is a matter of prioritization, and and that process is going on as we generate our evidence and try to convince government that this can work.
Professor, if you continue doing this for maybe 10 or 15 years, would it really strike the back of poverty? Would it break the back of poverty in our country?
I think it would, yes.
You think it would?
Yes.
How would it work? Show us the progression there.
Well,
you give money to the old men, money to the young men. How does it work? Give us the progression.
Well, let's. Although Uganda has a legislation that everybody should finish primary school, and it doesn't cost money to go to school, at least to walk into the classroom. There are lots of other costs involved in going to school. One is buying the books and buying the stationery and the writing instruments and so on. But another very important cost is that it means that the labor of the child is not available to the family anymore. So that labor might have been used by poor families either in the agriculture or taking care of smaller children so that the parent can go to work and so on. So if you give money to the family, that makes it possible for the family to send the child to school without sacrificing its economic position. Obviously, if the family's at the level of extremely low consumption, it's more important to keep the child working in some way, either as a babysitter or taking some vegetables to the market, than to send the child to school because the family's in desperate situation. So providing money to the family, even to the elders in the family, who then pass it down to the family members, enabling the child to go to school, makes a big difference for the child's education. So let me give you another statistic that we have. Suppose your parent had no schooling. Now you're a young adult. What probability do you have of having completed primary school yourself? The answer is 17%. A very low probability.
If your parent never went to school?
If your parent never went to school, somewhat less than 1/5 of people in that category themselves complete primary school. Well, if your parent had at least some post-primary school, so that's the most highly educated level that we look at, then your probability of completing primary school yourself is 46%. So it's 2.5 times as large as it was if your parent had no schooling. So the level of education of the parent, not even looking at income, just the level of education, has a massive effect on the probability that the child is going to have to complete school. That means that families of low education should be subsidized to make it more attractive for their children to go to school.
So professors beget professors.
Sorry?
Broadly speaking, professors beget professors.
Yeah, exactly. My parents were both professors, and I ended up being a professor.
Right.
And my sister ended up also in a very highly paid job. So we came from a highly educated family, and we had the ambition and the goal to become well-educated ourselves. So, but we can't simply forget about that very large fraction of society whose parents are not well educated. We have to give them something extra, some extra resources to make it more possible for them to complete schooling themselves. So I think if you had a program, like if these social protection programs were expanded to the whole population, right now it's only being done as a pilot group, I think over the period of a generation it would have a very large effect on the educational level of the population.
Over a generation,
and that, of course, will have a massive effect on economic development. So it's really a false dichotomy to say that focusing upon equalizing opportunities is competitive or antagonistic towards economic development. It's exactly necessary for economic development, because the main resource that is being lost in this country now and in developing countries generally are the undeveloped talents of their they're huge poor populations who simply don't have the opportunities to develop, to flourish and to develop those talents. So I think that undertaking these kinds of social protection programs and trying to equalize opportunities has a huge payoff in terms of economic growth.
Well, listeners, this is Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight, Uganda strives for social and economic transformation. What steps should the country take to overcome the bottlenecks, and what is the role of social protection in realizing this goal? We're going for a break. We'll be back.
When Junior lost his appetite, his mother tried all methods to get him to eat. She tried scary stories.
Eat, Tommy, eat, or the big black elephant will come and eat all your food.
She tried magic.
Tommy, if you eat your food, I will turn this handkerchief into sweets. Look, bumble, bumble, boom, boom.
Then she discovered Apetol multivitamin syrup with lysine.
Mommy, I finished all the food. I am number 1.
Apetol multivitamin with lysine is helping mothers to turn mealtime frustration to a fun moment. Apetol has a great taste and contains lysine, which quickly improves your child's appetite and supports healthy growth. Apetol, help for life.
John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. Soon people were coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also helped friends, seeing potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He's just who he is. Special.
So here's to men like John, who make a difference, who enjoy Nile Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the source. Nile Special. You've earned it.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
Accept no substitutes.
Radio 1, FM 90.
Welcome back. Tonight on Spectrum, Uganda strives for social and economic transformation. What steps should the country take to overcome the bottlenecks? What is the role of social protection in realizing this goal? Our guests tonight, Professor John Roemer, all the way from the USA. He's a professor of political science and economics at the Yale University. The last time I checked, it had the best law school in the world. Mr. Stephan Kasaija, head of social protection, the Social Protection Secretariat at the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. You two will be able to call in and ask questions. Mr. Kasaija, if you find an old man, he has 10 children, another old man who has 2 children, do you give them the same amount of money?
Yes, we give the same amount of money because this is a senior citizen grant. It is that individual.
It's based on the head, the man's head.
So that is the case. So whether you have 2 or 10,
it's the same amount.
Get the same amount. But as I said, this is the starting point of developing a system. As the system takes off, we could think of a child grant because children living with these senior citizens are automatically also vulnerable. So Uganda should be thinking in the future of building also on the senior citizen grant to have an older person, rather a child grant, also a person with disability grant, so that we can comprehensively address all those
poverty
groups.
Right.
Yeah, but earlier on you had already talked about what would be.
Wait a minute. So this can be a model which can be expanded.
Yeah.
You're helping the old people. It can be it's spiral down to the young and then to the disabled and so on.
Yes, that's the intention, that we should develop a system for social protection. And the social protection should really, in fact, even extend to the currently working people. Because when we are thinking of the policy, there are people who are working in the informal sector, for instance. They don't have any social security.
Right.
Any day a calamity befalls you, you have nothing to fall back to. You become vulnerable and you fall into poverty. So we think the system should be broader than that. So we are thinking in that direction. Then again, we have talked about what would be the benefits really from having such a system.
Right.
We are seeing like this senior citizen grant, if we gave it countrywide, it has an impact on reducing poverty.
Yes.
We know if we covered all the senior citizens 65 years and above, their poverty would say 30% of those households would be lifted above the poverty line in this country. We are talking about reducing the poverty gap among those 65 and above by 79%. We are also looking at the national poverty gap being reduced by 17%. So, depending on the size of the grant you are giving, you can impact on poverty, but also if the size was big, you can change the poverty status of the country.
Well, but this is not an investable amount. Do you expect some of the oil men to invest some of this money?
Sure,
or is it basically to take away the pain?
The evidence we are already having on the ground, 23,000 shillings. The voices we are getting from the people who are receiving this money over the last 7 months. Some of them are spending this money to buy seeds, to open up garden. They can hire labor at 5,000, 10,000. You can hire labor within the village and open a garden. It's not that people are just consuming it. There is a part which people are investing. We have seen people buy 2 chicken per month, 2 chicken per month in the area they are working. They are investing. We have seen people buying goats. We have seen people saying, I'm buying an iron sheet every month. Translating, it is just you need to be down on the ground and see what is happening to the people's lives. And all of a sudden, people had written off. They thought this is just
they're coming back from the dead. They're rising from the dead, basically.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal, I must say. Professor, can you give us some experience from other countries? I read somewhere that in a southern African country, I don't remember which one, when you give them this money, with time the children become taller. Is it going to happen here as well?
I don't.
It's a social indicator.
I don't know those facts, but that's not at all surprising, because the height of people, which is a measure of the nutrition they had in childhood, is very closely related to on average, to the income of their families. I mean, when you see countries like Japan that went from a very, very poor country in 1950 to a very rich country by 1980, the height of adults rose by several inches. I don't remember how many, but it's quite significant. So I want to reply to a skeptical question that I sometimes get when I talk about these ideas, and that is that the problem with poor and disadvantaged people is that they don't try hard enough, that they have low effort. So there's a subtle question: how does one measure effort? One way of measuring effort is the number of years you choose to go to school. And but if you take a group which is disadvantaged, the fact that they go to school for a fewer number of years than a more advantaged group, as in the last example I gave, is not primarily explained by lack of some internal psychological propensity that they lack. It's because their circumstances make it very difficult to go to school, and their circumstances may make them even lack ambition and be very pessimistic about the possibility of doing anything with their lives. So why go to school? So they go out and try to join, do petty jobs as early as they can. So the fair way to judge the amount of effort that a person expends is not by looking at some absolute measure like how many hours a week he works or how many years of school he's taken. It's really by judging the person with respect to the average of accomplishments of people in similar circumstances to his own. So if you look at the group consisting of all people of certain circumstances, say people born in the north in rural areas whose parents were poorly educated, if you look at that group of people and you look at any measure of effort you want, such as the years of school they complete or how many hours a week they work or whatever you like, you'll find that there's a whole distribution of results on that, of effort. And the fair way to measure effort is by looking at a person's ranking in that distribution. I mean, comparing how well he did compared to the mean of his group. Because the circumstances determine the amount of effort which is really accessible to the people in that group. So I think that's the response to, in other words, effort itself is determined by factors, largely by factors which are a matter of luck. Then, in addition to all the luck, there is the difference among individuals, and that does determine different degrees of effort which deserve reward. So the theory that I'm expounding is that once you measure effort properly, taking account of the circumstances of people which determine the average efforts in their group, and you measure their effort by their how well they perform with respect to that average, then a fair society is one that remunerates people so that their circumstances in the end have very little effect on what they get, what they achieve, and their relative effort has a big effect on what they achieve.
And how about the size of the family into which one is born?
That's also important, the number of siblings that a person has. Generally, families with, if you're born into a family with 10 children, it's going to be much harder for you to become educated than if you're born into a family with 2 children, generally speaking. I mean, you'll have to take care of the other children, there'll be more mouths to feed, you'll be less well nourished, and so on and so forth. So one of the circumstances that we do look at which is a matter again of, as you say, choosing your parents or choosing your birth family, is the number of siblings that people have.
Smaller families, people coming from smaller families tend to do better,
generally speaking,
regardless of income, or does that diminish
if you
with income?
Control for not for well-off people. For well-off people, the size of the family doesn't matter very much. I mean, in Britain, in the aristocracy in the 18th century, in the 17th century, the rich had very large families and their children did well. But for people of modest means, size of family is definitely something. The bigger family size reduces the probability that the child will be successful.
So the amount of bread on the breakfast table is an important factor there.
Yeah, and then why do people have large families? Well, one of the reasons is that the parents need social insurance. They need insurance in their old age. So again, if you expand social protection so that people have pensions, then they don't have to have...
They don't need insurance in children.
They don't need to insure themselves by having lots of children.
They use it to spread the risk. If you have many children, if you have 10, 3 might die, then you'll have 7, 2 might succeed, and then they'll bring the jackets.
They'll support you in
They
your
bring
old
me
age.
winter coats, in my old age, and so on. Mr. Kasaija, talk to us about child-headed families. I've seen some of them in Rakai, very touching situations there. It's a unique district, heads decimated by AIDS, child-headed families everywhere you turn. Have you considered this?
Yes, child-headed households are also targeted because this program, we don't only have a senior citizen grant, we also have a vulnerable family support grant.
Vulnerable family support grant. Those are 2 wings.
Yeah, we are testing 2 approaches.
Yes.
So the vulnerable family support grant combines, if you have a senior citizen, you have orphans, you have children heading households, you have person with disability, you have stand a higher chance. So we grade those households in a given community, rank them, and see the most vulnerable household. That one qualifies. It also gets the 23,000. So we are trying to see the impacts of both. So child-headed households, they can. It's only a matter of us spreading to reach Rakai. All those in Rakai would be covered. But in other districts where we are, those are also being picked already.
How has the government received this program? Because it's donor funded mostly. They've given you a very small amount of money, maybe less than 1%.
Yes, government has committed to this program because before we started, we got cabinet approval of this program, and the idea was test and come back with evidence. Now we are getting all the evidence. We are ready. We are on the way back to
cabinet.
And
how have you hedged yourselves against corruption? There was an old man in this country, he held a senior position, I won't say which one. Yes. He was given money for orphans to look after. He took much of it, saying he too was an orphan, and he was 8 years old. So there's no doubt that he was an orphan. How do you hedge against this?
There was no senior citizen grant. Now that you have a senior citizen grant, there is no need.
You might as well go for that.
Yeah,
you might appropriate all of it. How do you hedge yourself against corruption? It's a serious concern in this
corruption,
country.
We have really put in place good systems. One, we know like the delivery of cash is not done by individuals. We have contracted out a firm, and that's MTN has been contracted.
The phone company?
Yeah, using mobile money system. So they handle that bit. On our own system, we have developed a management information system which captures all the data from the communities. Communities participate from the village. We have included all the systems. Parish chiefs, community leader, parish development committees, the community development officers, all those participate in the selection of the households. Once the people have been selected scientifically, these people have to vet and verify that these people really exist. Then people are given SIM cards on which money is loaded through MTN. So the person has their own SIM card, which they go, is a pay card, which they go with to a mobile money agent on the payday. present to verify that money is available, then you sign for your money and go with it.
So you plugged all the loopholes.
Yeah, the loopholes.
But still the officials give you their support.
Yeah.
Sometimes money is returned to the treasury because some people don't have a chance to take some of it for themselves. You've not had a problem with that?
No, that one can't stand in because currently the system is...
And other departments of government can learn from you the way you plug the loopholes.
Sure.
Well, listeners, you can call in now. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight, Uganda strives for social and economic transformation. What steps should the country take to overcome the bottlenecks? And what is the role of social protection in realizing this goal? You can call in now. Our numbers 0414-348-111, 0312-260-390, 0312-226-1390. When you call in, please tell us your name and where are you calling from?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening. Your name? Spectrum, hello? Okay, let's get the response to that. Professor?
Could you summarize it for me? I found it hard to hear.
Well, it says that if you want to hit the back of poverty, talk to the leaders first, let them be sensitized to this intervention, this kind of intervention.
Well, I think leaders have to be really forced to do things that the people want. That's the whole purpose of a democracy. It's for the people to be able to express their views and to basically force the government to take the actions which are in the interest of the people. So the preliminary requirement to talking to the leaders is to convince the population and the voters that these things are important, and then they will elect politicians and members of parliament who will push for these ideas.
Spectrum, hello? Hello? Your name, my friend?
Moses in Luero.
Yes, Moses in Luero. I'll rephrase it, please. Well, he's talking about people who are being thrown off land. That has some political connotations. There are people who are landless. Some of them have occupied forest reserves and they're being thrown off those plots. Some people have held these lands flimsically without land titles. They occupy them, through history.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, land reform has been a crucial policy which countries have taken to when they engage in beginning of economic development. Taiwan, which was very poor in 1950, had a huge land reform which actually redistributed land, that broke up the big landowners, latifundias, whatever you call them, the big holdings, and gave them out to small farmers, and that's been a policy which has been important in many countries. So I think when people occupy land which is not owned by them, often it's a sign that land reform is really needed.
You're saying, Professor, that in Norway they took land from the big owners and gave it to the poor, and it worked. It worked for them.
Yes.
It has one of the best indicators in the world.
Taiwan is one of the most highly developed countries now in
and
East
they did
Asia.
that.
Yeah.
Here it seems to be the reverse. Land is being taken from the poor, from what some people say.
Oh, from the
given
poor.
to the rich.
Yeah. Well, that's backward. That's bad policy. Of course, that should be reversed.
Mr. Kasaija, does that feature in the places where you work, land ownership?
No.
Among the poor?
Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development is not responsible for land.
Well, the people you go to work with, do they bring out some of these issues?
No. Most of these are very vulnerable groups.
All right.
And some of them really don't own land.
Spectrum, hello? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, sir, your name?
My name is Daniel and I am calling from Chirika.
Yes, Daniel.
I want to appreciate
gets get by. Mr. Kasaija?
Yes, I think I agree with the caller that really if you qualify for your benefit, it is your right. For your pension, you should really access the pension. And I know in government is working to strengthen pension reform and make sure that people access their money. That effort is on. But what we are also working on contributes to strengthening the whole social protection system. Pension is part of the broader social protection system. And so as we develop these systems, we shall be talking. As we get good management information systems, we shall also be strengthening. Because I know one of the major problems in pensions, it is the information management. So once the information management gets fully streamlined, we should be seeing improved service delivery to all our people.
Professor, could you expand for us a little bit about the equality of opportunity concept? Could you broaden it a little bit for us?
Well, maybe I would just say something about this last caller. So what he's calling for is social welfare, is a welfare state. That is to say, a state that has large insurance programs which rescue people when they have bad luck. And this is something which developed massively in the highly developed countries of the world during the 20th century. So that most countries now, virtually all developed countries, guarantee that people have health care when they need it, and they don't pay. It's paid through taxes. That they have education, which is entirely financed by the state, at least through K through 12. In the Northern European countries, even university education is financed entirely by the state, including the costs of going to college, of room and board. That's all financed by the state in those countries. Insurance for when you're unemployed, that you get paid when you're unemployed, and all these things are paid for through taxes. So that requires taxing people at a fairly high level, so that in the Northern European countries, about 1/2 of the total income of the country is paid in taxes to the government, which then provides all these services to people. But it makes for a much better society. Let me give you an example. So many people who are fairly well off think, well, what do I get out of this? I pay taxes. I'm not going to need unemployment insurance. I have a very secure job. If I'm healthy, I can pay for going to the doctor and so on. What do I get out of it? Well, first of all, you may need these services even if you think you're quite well off, if you get a very serious disease or if you become disabled and can't work. But the other thing that everybody gets out of having that kind of a society is that the society there's much less crime. People don't have to live in gated communities. They don't have to hire private security guards. Denmark is an example of a country which has this very high level of social insurance provision. And when I first visited Denmark a number of years ago, I was really astounded. I walked into a supermarket to buy some groceries, and I noticed outside the supermarket were a number of prams with little babies in them. Nobody watching them. And the mothers were inside the store shopping.
And nobody's going to harm those babies.
And nobody's going to kidnap those babies in Denmark. The point is there's such equality that there's a solidaristic feeling among people. And it's a much, much safer place. I mean, the number of rapes in Denmark per annum is probably something like 100. I mean, it's an extremely small fraction of the number of rapes per capita that we have in my country, the United States, which is much more unequal. So I think one shouldn't discount the value to the society at large of having eliminated poverty and provided people with opportunities. Another thing you see in Denmark is that everybody uses the public transportation. The rich don't drive around in limousines. They use the buses too, because there's no fear. Everything is well run, and it's convenient, and you don't have to worry about getting a parking space. So it's a society with, on the pram thing, there's an interesting anecdote. I live in New York City, and about 5 years ago, a Danish woman who was visiting New York, I guess she was there working or something, or her husband was was working, and she left her child in a pram outside the grocery store. Immediately, the cops came and arrested her. I said, "You're endangering your child." She just wasn't used to it.
Wow, that's remarkable. Talk to us a little bit about poverty. Is it possible to actually eradicate poverty? You've spoken about reducing the tensions by, papering over the inequalities, reducing inequalities.
I think that the northern European countries have pretty much eliminated poverty. You don't see in these, the current situation with the recession, with the Great Recession, is, of course, is a trying test for these countries. But in these northern European countries, you don't see homeless people. And you don't see people wandering around the streets talking to themselves and so on. I mean, it just seems as if they've solved these social problems by having the social provision. Now, one thing that you could say is that, Uganda isn't rich enough to do these things yet. But the European countries started building their welfare states when they were quite poor, the beginning of the 20th century. So
that is the early 1900s.
Early 1900s, yeah. Right. So you don't have
to wait until you're very rich.
You can't wait until you're very rich. You have to start. You have to start earlier.
Well, we'll have to end here. Thank you very much, dear guest.